And the purpose of these lectures is to discuss here at Brown issues of political, economic, cultural, and social significance in modern India, unquote. The inaugural lectures were given by Kaushik Basu in November of 2012. Since then, our lecturers have included, and there's just a partial listing, Ram Guha, Ashish Nandi, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, William Dalrymple, Salman Rushdie, Amitav Ghosh, Monte Ahluwalia, Raghuram Rajan, and several others, of course. Today's Jindal lecture is part of a series that we planned and conceptualized at the Saxena Center. And the title of the series is The Media and Democracy in India. The previous two speakers were Siddharth Vardarajan, editor of The Wire, and Shekhar Gupta, editor of The Print. And our third speaker in this series is Ravish Kumar. Ravish Kumar, until quite recently, was the senior executive editor of NDTV India, hosting a number of programs, including the channel's flagship weekday show, Prime Time, Hum Log, Ravish Ki Report, or Des Ki Baat. Desh Ki Baat nahi, Des Ki Baat. He's twice received the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award for the Best Journalist of the Year, and became the 5th Indian journalist to receive the Ramon Magsaysay Award, a very important international award given in Manila in 2019. I will not say much about the substance of the lecture. You will hear it, and we will have commentary later, and I might say a few comments myself. The title is Weaponizing the Media, Delegitimating the Citizens. That is his perspective on what's happened to the Indian media since 2014, especially since 2014. With perhaps, yes, I actually read the text already, with a great deal of focus on what has happened since 2019. Ravish will speak for 45 minutes roughly, plus minus a few. And then we'll have 3 commentators whom I will introduce after Ravish's lecture is over. And then after the commentators have spoken, we will open up for Q&A from the audience. So with that, let me welcome Ravish Kumar to the podium. Please give him a round of applause. And I think all of us are looking forward to what he has to say about a very important, a matter of great significance for Indian public life.
काफ़ी लंबा लेक्चर है and everybody must know that English is not my language. So what I am reading here is translated by my colleague. So here I start. Namaskar. Thank you all very much for inviting me here and for making it here today. Thank you also for giving me the chance to see a city as beautiful as Providence. It is not just difficult to work in Indian TV media, it is just as difficult to talk about it. No matter how much one speaks, there is so much more to say. At the outset, I want to clarify and define a couple of terms that I'll be using today. I'll be using TV media, but I'll also use the term Godi media. A rough English translation for this term is lapdog media, but I'm not very happy with this translation, so I will use Godi media for now. The second is viewer citizen, Darshak Nagrik. I describe the TV viewer as a viewer citizen. These are the front row citizens watching TV news who think they can see and know it all. They exercise their civil rights by speaking out in front of the TV or watching the TV speak. Often they merely believe that they are doing so. In their first 10 years, TV channels tried to instill this sense in their viewer that while you are watching the TV, we are asking the questions on your behalf. That's why I describe these viewers as viewer citizens, Darshak Nagrik in Hindi. My topic today is how the media has been weaponized while the citizens watching it have been disarmed. I'll broadly discuss how this process paved the way for and happened via their delegitimization. This is a paradoxical story where while journalism has ended, the medium itself has become more powerful than ever before. Although TV media was fairly powerful even before 2014, after 14 its power rose exponentially. Before 2014, the roots of its power were located in the viewer citizens. Since 2014, its power has started to derive from patronage to the state and the ruling party, which displaced the viewer citizen. TV media empowered the viewer citizen on the strength of its information and questions, giving them the feeling that you are the front row citizen who watches everything. This same viewer citizen, Darshak Nagrik, has been made completely informationless. First information was prevented from reaching the TV channels, and then TV channels were also offered an alternative to information. This alternative was the narrative. The idea of the narrative has had its own journey. For long now, I have been describing it as the national syllabus of TV channels, a syllabus that was designed elsewhere. In fact, it was already present in Indian politics, but has in recent years been made the national syllabus of TV channels too. This national syllabus contains all the issues that have for decades been published by right-wing books, newspapers, and magazines. To give you an example, the Modi government did not conduct a census in India during its almost 10-year tenure, but numerous debates were conducted during Assam and Bengal elections on the rapid increase in the country's Muslim population. From time to time, this bogus issue kept reappearing on debate platforms, like after the 2019 general elections. Before 2014, private TV media had painstakingly established itself as a public visual space, PVS, where the public felt powerful and the government accountable. The public was made to realize that TV media is its representative, which questioned the government and forced it to give answers. There are many examples of this, but you can see this relationship between the TV channel and the viewer citizen play out during the Nirbhaya movement and anti-corruption movement in Delhi. It is true that today the reasons for the origin and consolidation of these two movements are being analyzed afresh, but that is beyond the scope of my present topic. It was clearly visible that these movements were not only happening on ground, but also as much in the TV studios. In fact, for the first time, makeshift TV studios were built right at the protest site and debates were broadcast live from there. So in this way, TV media created a neutral public visual space whose viewers, citizens felt they had unmitigated rights. And in their understanding of their rights, TV media was also a right. This relationship and trust persisted unaffected for a few months after 2014. The viewer citizen maintained the same level of trust and watched news channel debate shows from the vantage point of their earlier relationship. But TV channels snapped this relationship in one stroke and started tweaking the information which had imparted a sense of empowerment to the viewer citizen. The kind of information that produces questions simply disappeared. For this to happen, it was crucial that the viewers who felt entitled in front of the TV started imagining themselves as helpless and unsafe. Using various kinds of themes and theories, the direction of the debate began to be changed. And gradually, public visual space began transforming into what I call the nationalist visual space. The nationalist visual space had to exclude or divide anyone who was associated with the collective identity of the viewer citizen. In the name of nationalism, citizens were divided into various categories and assigned different names, but all these names had one common theme. All of these started getting targeted and delegitimized. This process did not happen only on the media platforms. Outside the media, Godi media narratives were given legitimacy by imprisoning civil society activists and journalists and many others. The nationalist visual space sometimes touched on the issues of religion, but came back to and remained focused on this project of segregating its viewer citizens. For instance, the Muslim community and Muslim leaders started getting targeted over things like respecting the tricolor or singing Vande Mataram. Do keep in mind that this was no longer being done by political party leaders like earlier, but by Godi media anchors, who did a much better job of it. In this process, the job of demonizing the traditional minorities continued, but majority viewer who did not fit into the nationalist visual space was still a challenge. All of these majority viewers were thus identified as opponents of nationalism or anti-nationalist and split up into various types of minorities. First, they were described as opposed to the nation, then as opposed to dharma or religion. In this process, our viewer citizens started to transform into a viewer Hindu, Darshak Hindu. To ensure this, constant fear about the integrity of the nation and religion was created among these helpless viewer Hindus. Predictably, they were threatened with the figure of Muslims, but they were also equally threatened using the names of Arundhati Roy and Sudha Bharadwaj, Gautam Navlakha, and as much as in the name of journalists like many of us. All these figures were declared a threat to the nation. One by one, They were all marked as anti-national, anti-Modi, and now more clearly anti-Hindu, dividing them into categories like Azadi Gang, Communist, Award Wapsi Gang, Urban Naxal, Tukre Tukre Gang, Secular Ati, Prostitute, etc. An ultimate identity was decided for them. So we see that while the pre-existing minority was demonized, many other minorities were also created and fear was instilled in this new, always threatened majority. While Godi media was manufacturing this sense of insecurity amongst this majority, it was also establishing one phase as the guarantee of security. First, it established him as a symbol of nationalism, then as the foremost custodian of religion, the national priest, and as a guardian. This phase was Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. It is difficult to find any communalist tone in Modi's 2014 election speeches, though he came with his own history of sectarian politics. That which could not be said during elections, or that which we could not say himself, was all outsourced to the media. Godi anchors who had openly thrown themselves into the fray of defending nationalism firmly established themselves among the viewer Hindu as Modi supporters. After he came to power, they had no option left but to support him on every issue. We know that politics of Hindu unity runs hand in hand with Hindu insecurity. Godi media accomplished this work on a massive scale in one stroke, which the affiliates of this politics could not do in many years despite the dozens of organizations. Now let's come to the third visual space. Public visual space changed into nationalist visual space and then into what we call the Hindu visual space. Parallel to this, BJP RSS politics too started on a journey after 2014 and is now at a point when a BJP union minister insists that the 2014 election is not a political election, but a dharma yudh or religious war. But when there is such a strong government that prioritizes Hindu interests and such a large media, then why are Hindus still unsafe? The answer is that Hindu viewers exist only as long as they are insecure. As soon as their priorities change, they will return to issues of economy and livelihood. There is even a chance that their civic sense will prod them to question those who are in power. To ensure this doesn't happen, many types of campaigns were run to urge the Hindu viewers to not watch those journalists who had been marked as anti-Hindu. As a result, Hindu viewers began to proudly proclaim that they were boycotting anti-Hindu journalists. Brands associated with Muslim actors were boycotted. Their film screenings were attacked. Even I was branded as anti-Hindu and memes were made viral where my name was changed to show that I am a Muslim. In these memes, I was dressed in a Muslim attire, beards were morphed, and I was trolled. On the one hand, this said that being a Muslim was similar to being a criminal. On the other hand, it branded us as Muslims and campaigned for our boycott. Muslim journalists have been issued open death threats. Their faces morphed into objectionable videos and made viral. The attacks were not limited to social boycotts. Journalists like us were isolated by the government itself when central ministers and even a spokesperson refused to come to our shows. These processes merit separate studies, but this is how all of our work has been dismissed with such orchestrated attacks. But this is how the Hindu visual space was sanitized and the media became a majoritarian media. Let's talk a bit more about this Hindu visual space. In this TV space, the Hindu viewer was not only provided with a sense of insecurity, but also with a kind of Hindu happiness, Hindu sukh, which manufactured in the name of protection. I describe this as the TV viewers' Hindu happiness. In Hindi, Hindu sukh. The Hindu viewers derive immense gratification and pleasure in the fact that they dominate the Hindu visual space. On the Godi media platform, every Hindu threat is challenged and bashed up. Of course, it has itself manufactured these threats. The Hindu viewer tastes victory in every single debate. The joy that comes from this victory begins to include revenge for many perceived defeats of history. This Hindu happiness has replaced traditional news categories of financial and social distress. As long as the Hindus are in danger, locking horns, and the TV is on their side, they are happy in the Hindu visual space. They have forgotten how powerful they felt in the public visual space when the governments feared them. Now, even the possibility of this Hindu viewer questioning the government and becoming public again has ended for now. They have been told that even though the government has failed on the questions of economy, it has gained immense success on the religious front. In the Hindu viewer, the sense of citizenships that flowed from the constitution has been replaced by citizenship that is based on religion. Bodies floated in the Ganga during the peak of COVID, yet Godi media channels celebrated the government COVID response. During extended period of inflation, Godi media largely ignored the story of inflation. The same media before 2014 would interview homemakers from inside their kitchens in times of inflation. Instead, Godi media started imposing manufactured issues around the nation and religion. If you consider the newsroom formation, all the prerequisites for transforming it into a Hindu visual space were already present there. The Godi media newsroom has been dominated by the upper caste. All those pre-existing resentments of the newsroom transformed into ambitions in the Hindu visual space. No wonder these anchors had to talk about Hindu nation with conviction as the topic began appearing openly in TV debates after 2019. It is difficult to point to the precise date this happened or the month when this all began. This went on between 2014 to 19, but after 2019, it started happening blatantly and was for all to see. Before the TV, the same thing had happened in the newspapers too. During the Ram Janambhoomi Babri Masjid controversy, many UP newspapers gave prominent space to communalist things that were muttered in hushed tones before. But at the time and even later, communalism had not become the face of newspaper journalism. Having said that, the Hindi dailies published from Uttar Pradesh, some of which are among the most widely read newspapers in India today, had prepared the ground for this work. Charu Gupta and Mukul Sharma's book, Print Media and Communalism, offers excellent research on this topic. This is the first time after 2014 that communalism has been recognized as journalism. For Godi media, communalism is an official mandate. This had never happened in the history of TV. At the time of Gujarat riots in 2002, the TV medium was alive to the fact that there should be no violence. With a few exceptions, most channels were against communalism. TV journalism emerged naturally in opposition to communal riots. Whenever there was a terrorist blast anywhere, channels would compete to promote and foster religious unity amidst all the turmoil. After the Mumbai and Banaras bomb blast, TV considered it a duty to send out the message of social unity by organizing and reporting candlelight events or inviting classical singers or folk artists. On the same lines, TV reporting on the Gujarat riots was mostly anti-communal. In the BBC documentary a year after the riots, Modi said to a reporter that I made only one mistake, which is not handling the media properly. And also completely communalized today, communalism is the core of the professional ethics observed by these channels. Human resources have been expelled from TV. In his era, this medium became the most formidable medium for spreading communalism. Godi media is the biggest platform for communal hatred. This is the world's largest communalist space and primarily an anti-Muslim space. In order to forge this Hindu visual space and the Hindu viewer, the colors, tonality, words, graphics of TV screen were all changed. Merely switching to these channels makes visible the visual order of a Hindu nation. PM Modi commands this visual order. In this way, these channels also establish a visual majoritarianism for the Hindu viewers, which normalizes its underlying politics among them, instilling a sense of pride. When Allahabad, a city of Uttar Pradesh, was renamed Prayagraj, one TV channel wrote Allahabad in green and the Prayagraj in saffron. Through this communal color coding, these channels clarified that for them, Allahabad meant Muslims, while Prayagraj meant Hindu. The word Maulana is used as a cuss word. Opposition spokesperson started being referred to as Maulana. In the thumbnails, Muslim faces were represented in a way that resembled the Muslim villains of Amar Chitra Katha, a famous comic. In this way, the TV, which the TV viewer once watched in a neutral space, now was watched in a Hindu versus Muslim space. TV splits its citizens into minority and majority. Now the differences which were ideological also became visual. As I remarked earlier, your loyalty to the nation was decided according to the channel you watched. The Godi Media Studio became the most prominent mark of this division. This divide extended even within the Hindu viewers. Ramit Verma and Kunal Kamra started collecting and collating some data on TV debates from 2019. Influenced by this, some other websites also did similar work. Although this work could not be accomplished in a concrete way, but the statistics we get from these sources are fairly accurate reminder of how our media has turned majoritarian. Many statistics collated by Ramit and Kunal illustrate that in many Godi media debate shows, the main topics were either anti-opposition or about religion. Within religion, most were anti-Muslim. Ramit and Kunal examined the data of 275 episodes of Zee News program Tal Thok Ke. Of these, 69 were against the opposition and 51 on religion, often to push back a public issue that has become serious. Such non-issues would be manufactured, which are completely nonsensical. As per Ramit and Kunal's research to cover up the government's failure on COVID, 387 primetime debates on 5 channels were studied between August to September 2020. Of these 387, 218 debates were on the film actor Sushant Singh Rajput. Most of the allegations and questions raised in these debates later proved to be false. In this way, the media distanced itself from those issues on which the Prime Minister or the government had to be held accountable. Instead, attacks on the opposition increased because, naturally, such issues had to come from the opposition. Gradually, the media started filling up their airtime space with the Prime Minister. Actually, in the media space, the Prime Minister was represented almost like a Hindu emperor. Be it a video of him meditating in the Kedarnath caves right before the 2019 elections, or the visuals of him genuflecting in prayer at the new parliament building inauguration in 2023. The ways of looking within Indian politics and democracy started to transform. He was no longer only the inaugurator of government programs, but he also started appearing as the official priest of Hindu rituals. In a way, the camera also established the Prime Minister as the national priest of India. For this national priest of India, space was created for religious rituals within democratic or constitutional programs. To be fair, religious rituals were indeed a part of the performance in democratic or constitutional programs earlier. But now, democratic or constitutional programs themselves have taken a back seat in these religious events planned for the national priest of India. This has happened at the highest possible level. If the Prime Minister was seen at the foundation laying ceremony of the Ram temple, he was also seen surrounded by priests at the parliament inauguration. By legitimizing a democratic post with religious authority, his image in the Hindu visual space of the Godi media was reinforced and solidified as the Lord protector of Hinduism and of the nation. Meanwhile, when visuals of Rahul Gandhi visiting temples in April 2019 started appearing, he was immediately attacked and accused of hypocrisy. The Hindu visual space had been constructed in such a way that only Modi could be there. Only Modi could be visible. Here, Modi was the only genuine Hindu devotee, no one else. You could be fasting, you could be praying for hours, but that was not reason enough to permit you into the Hindu visual space. In this process, the viewer citizen was converted into a committed Hindu citizen, thus strengthening and expanding the Sangh's agenda. Those who do not believe in the Sangh's Hindutva are excluded from the Hindu visual space like Rahul Gandhi. This represented a new type of majority which had the power of the state, which was exercised through the media and which the media demonstrated among them. If you want to understand Godi media's power and its weaponization, you will have to look at the judiciary's comments on its hate program. In most cases, from the high courts to the Supreme Court have warned, have expressed their frustration, but have stopped short of issuing strict orders. In the early days of COVID, Godi media began attacking Muslims via the Tabligh Jamaat. They were labeled as super spreaders and held responsible for spreading COVID across the country. The situations became so dire that Tablighi Jamaat people started getting arrested. Even in the state's official press conferences, COVID infections were amongst Tablighi members were reported separately. As a result, even buying vegetables and fruits from ordinary Muslims vendors was boycotted in low-income areas and high-rise housing societies as well. They were attacked in public places. Fake videos of Muslims men spitting in public places were made viral with the allegation of purposely spreading COVID. And all of these was aired on primetime television and through various channels of WhatsApp and IT cell. Fact checkers like Alt News spent many months countering these fake narratives. Yet these notions spread like wildfire amongst the general public. This was the first test of impact of Godi media, which was successful. Wait for the final test. The issues of representing Tablighi Jamaat as super spreader was promptly forgotten, but it exposed the power of the court and the state also. The Bombay High Court and Karnataka High Court released many Tablighi people, making serious remarks on the media in their verdicts, but failed to punish any of them. This says something about how powerful the Godi media really has become. In September 2022, the Supreme Court had observed that the role of TV anchors is crucial in ensuring that the debate programs do not turn into hate speech. Justice K.M. Joseph has said that we cannot allow hatred to be broadcast on TV. In January 2023, the court asked if any such programs had been taken off air. The Supreme Court has warned routinely, has even directed the state to take urgent actions in matters of hate speech. But hate speech continues to air unbridled on these channels. In a system worth thousands of crores of rupees, you cannot hope to make a dent with fines of few thousand. Till date, the police have not taken any action. While the Constitutional Court appears ineffective against the Godi media has itself turned into a public court. An initial glimpse of this public court can be seen in news anchor Arnab Goswami's debate show with Umar Khalid, where Umar's volume was lowered while he was being branded as anti-national on live TV. The anchor's bullish power and this February 2016 campaign against Umar Khalid culminated in his arrest in September 2020. When the UP government demolished an accused house even before the court's sentencing, this media began celebrating the bulldozer. It positioned the bulldozer as an expansion of its own version of public court. And right here in New Jersey, during the Indian Independence Day parade, its viewer brought a bulldozer to the parade. Repeated attempts were made to peddle with the view that Godi media did all this for TRP, but the anchors have said many times that if the public has voted for Narendra Modi, they will show it. They don't see TRP as an obligation, which was the biggest reason for the TV journalism's ruin before 2014. Today, billionaires like Ambani and Adani have numerous channels, but these channels are full of hatred. Obviously, this is not related to TRP and revenue. This media was given cover by the government machinery, IT cell, political supporters, BJP and the Prime Minister. In fact, a new media complex was created which had to be led by the Godi media. Today, the media complex resembles that convention center where many halls are linked with the main hall. Once this was a medium of empowerment for the people, but since 2014, it has been weaponized in a way to make people powerless. I call it in Hindi, Nirastirikaran. Media ka Shastrikaran or Darshak ka Nirastirikaran. In India's democratic setup, media was called the fourth state, but now we have a media in front of us that has become Modi's first state, not fourth. Many examples show when the Prime Minister and Godi media anchors have used similar words. Many times, the media introduces certain words and ideas and soon Modi deploys them, thus further legitimizing them. When the opposition alliance used India acronym as its name, then after government criticism, the newspaper Dainik Jagran preferred to call it INDIA. If you see the visuals of written headline, it's very difficult to read. In Hindi, INDIA. So India, instead of India, Dainik Jagran give so much space to write a new way of India that you cannot read that India is written. This despite the fact that headline space in a newspaper is limited. Thus, both Modi and the media became complementary to each other. Obviously, weaponizing of media has not happened because of TRP and revenue. Doordarshan is a state medium. It has no pressure of TRPs and revenues. Before 2014, there used to be a difference between the public broadcaster and private channels. But now, in terms of content and tone, Doordarshan too has become like a private broadcaster. Vinit Kumar has talked about this change in his forthcoming book Media Ka Loktantra, published by Rajkamal Prakashan. It cannot be ignored that India Opposition Alliance has decided to boycott a public broadcaster anchor. The public broadcaster does not have concerns of TRP or money. Yet its tone has turned anti-opposition, like private Godi media. He argues that after 2013, its coverage has transformed and aims to instill a mistrust and hatred for opposition parties among the voters. They are even encouraged to think that these parties are enemies of democracy. If you look at the titles, visuals, and language of the debates in Doordarshan's flagship primetime show, year by year, the episodes show that in India, supposedly world's largest democracy, the opposition has no role. The pattern of topic selection relies on statements of the ruling party spokesperson against the opposition. In the show, the statement is repeated by the anchor and the panelist from ruling party or its IT cell. In this situation, despite the opposition inclusion in the panel, its impact in the show remains negligible. For example, Islamization of Jharkhand, question mark, will Jinnah win, question mark, dispute over Jinnah, love for Pakistan, who is an accidental Hindu, conspiracy to create an Islamic country, Congress emergency returned, are some titles from the public broadcaster debate. These debates are similar to other private channels. In fact, some were even broadcast on several channels simultaneously. Today, it is not just the mouthpiece of the state. In the Modi era, it has now become impossible to differentiate between the public broadcaster and a party spokesperson committed to propagating the Hindu visual space. It is not surprising that our Home Minister Amit Shah says that public aspirations can be best expressed through All India Radio and Doordarshan, rather than any other media. Prime Minister is on YouTube. He is asking for you to subscribe and press the bell icon. Do it for my channel also, Ravish Kumar Official. It is obvious he has found another medium which was at best dormant until now. Ironically, Indian Godi media has become the biggest weapon of censorship. Indian media has had to go through various kinds of censorship, but never before has the media censored the people's voice in this way before. The sole purpose of this censorship is to firmly establish and entrench the Hindu visual order and exclude everyone else from it. To preserve this visual order, Godi media also created a silence zone where any issue that might cause discomfort to the PM Modi government should not even be touched. When the RPF constable Chetan Singh killed 3 Muslims clearly in the name of religion, this media found and devised ways to shield him. There was widespread speculation about mental instability, although nothing had been said officially. Later, the court itself was forced to say that Chetan Singh did everything fully in his senses and committed the murders in pure hatred. When the Odisha train accident happened in June 2023, this Godi media repeatedly reported that Muslim officer had run away, risking widespread riot across the country. The railways, however, refuted this, saying that no one had run away. Blatant lies were spread on TV saying that the accident happened near a mosque. In truth, it was a temple near the accident site. It was said the station master is Muslim, whereas he was not. Remember, these are just isolated examples of how any incident where the masters of this national syllabus can be held accountable is turned into a favorable topic for the Hindu visual space. The Indian media today has become the voice of only the Hindu majority. The unification between Godi media and Modi's politics is crystal clear. Today, such a political situation has been normalized that anyone advocating for a Hindu Rashtra can enter a television studio. When confronted with any criticism, this Hindu force debates that Hindu phobia is being spread. Whichever way you look at it, one thing is certain. This is not the platform where the constitutional sense and sensibility of the viewer citizen, Darshak Nagari, would sharpen. Today, this is the creator of an exclusionary Hindu sensibility. There is still another process which I won't talk about in detail, but I will mention it by way of a conclusion. The citizens who were delegitimized and excluded from the Hindu visual space tried to establish an alternative media on their own initiative. The farmers' movement in India had already seen the examples of Shaheen Bagh and the citizenship protest. They had been villainized as terrorists. That's why the farmers' movement boycotted the Godi media from the very beginning, and instead set up a parallel system in opposition to Godi media. They had a clear-sighted way of fighting Godi media and its delegitimizing labels. But such movements are not ordinary, routine affairs. Godi media debates, in contrast, are a part of daily existence. I would like to thank my colleague Vrinda and Kanav for their inputs and for translating this speech. Indian media getting communalized is not an exception or a blip. We are witnessing history being made, a history whose book has not yet been published. But we are getting an idea of what this book will look like. I have no confusion regarding the weaponization of this media. You are welcome to hold on to your confusions. Thank you.
I am by training a political scientist. And though I've always worked on empirical matters, for the last few years I've been reading a lot of political theory, which happens to be normative rather than, it has something to say about the empirical reality, but it's about judgments. Madhav Khosla wrote a truly fabulous book some 3-4 years ago about the making of the Indian Constitution, and wrote a very interesting political theory-based line that most of empirical research in political science seems to suggest that politics is a reflection of social cleavages and social realities. There is a tradition in political theory going back to Thomas Hobbes, who wrote that politics can create new realities, especially if politics is control of, especially those who are in control of state power can create new realities. They are not straightforwardly a reflection of existing social realities. They can create new realities. They are exogenous, to use the technical language. And it doesn't happen all the time, but at many moments in history, this has happened and will happen. So one thing that perhaps we can return to as we examine this brilliant reflection on what has happened to Indian media is whether media has been used by those in control of state power to create new realities, to create new configurations. Some relationship with history, but the creation of new reality will have some relation with history, but also depends on how history is interpreted and presented. That's all I'll say at this time. Let me introduce the first commentator. Sadanand Dhume writes a bi-weekly column on India and South Asia for Wall Street Journal, focuses on the region's politics. He is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Previously, he worked as the New Delhi Bureau Chief for Far Eastern Economic Review, Indonesia correspondent of Far Eastern Economic Review, and the Wall Street Journal Asia correspondent also there. Sadanand is the author of My Friend the Fanatic, Travels with the Radical Islamists, that emerged from his work in Indonesia, where also I met him because I was working in Indonesia. I first met him here. His next book, the book that is more or less ready now, should be out by the next election, looks at India's transformation since the election of Prime Minister Modi in 2014. Sadanand has degrees from the University of Delhi, Princeton University, and Columbia. And he lives in Washington, D.C., where he also works. I have invited him in particular because he was present here as a commentator on the second lecture by Shekhar Gupta. And in the second lecture, I had invited someone who was present as a commentator in the first lecture. So keeping that idea of continuity, opening the possibility of a comparative reflection. I invited him specially for this event, Sadanand. All commentators will speak between 10 to 15 minutes. I've said them 12 minutes, plus minus. And we will then go from the first to the second to the third and then open up.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Ashu, and congratulations, Ravish, on that really stirring and wonderful talk that you gave. And in terms of sort of this, Ashu spoke of continuity. I would urge all of you to go back and watch the first two lectures in this series by Siddharth Varadarajan and Shekhar Gupta. And if you watch all of these three together, you'll really get a really sort of richly textured idea of not only what is going on in India, but also the debate, because each speaker has a slightly different view of the reality. And I think it's ironic and also symbolic of this moment that we are able to have this kind of not just free and open, but also really detailed look at what are sensitive issues in the United States of America. It's very hard to imagine at this moment an institution in India being able to host and develop these themes the way Professor Varshney has over here at Brown. So I wanted to sort of start with that. Now, a lot of you in this audience are quite young, so you may not remember a movie that came out 20 years ago. It's a wonderful movie which I recommend most highly called Goodbye Lenin. And the premise of Goodbye Lenin is that there's this family living in Germany, in East Germany. And the mother in this family is very committed to the Communist Party. She goes into a coma in October 1989. And when she wakes up in June 1990, everything is different. The Berlin Wall has fallen. There is no East Germany. It's being integrated into the West. And the son, it has one goal, which is to not shock his mother, who was a very committed communist, and to pretend as though East Germany is still around. It's a really fantastic and really funny movie. And it came to my mind as I was reading Ravish's speech. Because in a way, imagine someone going into a coma in India in 2013. And then they wake up in 2023. And they turn on the TV, and there's no Ravish Kumar. There's no Barkhadat. There's no Sagarika Ghosh. There's no Nidhi Razdan. There's no Karan Thapar. So the same sort of equivalent thing where if you had you fast forward 10 years and all of these figures were very familiar faces on Indian television for a long time have disappeared. Now, in his talk, Ravish uses a very striking phrase, which is that he says journalism has ended. And I want to just sort of think a little bit about that. What does it mean to say journalism has ended, right? Because you still have television channels, you have people who are doing ostensibly news shows and so on. But if I would sort of unpack that, my understanding of what is meant by journalism has ended is a few different things. One of the things that has disappeared is a sense of professionalism, basic professionalism. And in his talk, Ravish gave the example of Omar Khalid appearing on one of these channels, Arnab Goswami's channel. While he's being questioned, his volume is turned down so that he cannot respond. So that's a basic sort of act of professional malpractice that would not occur if journalistic professionalism was still alive. In a related way, another thing that's really changed quite dramatically is standards. And I'll be very upfront over here, and I'll admit that there's a bit of a value judgment in this. But I was a commentator in two different national channels for the national elections in 2014 and 2019. And what was quite striking to me was when on the 2019 panel was that the number of people who were now part of the discussion who were not on any channel in 2014. Now, you could argue, and I think many people who are sort of oriented towards the BJP would argue that this represents a certain democratization, that people who had been left out were now in the television studios and so on. But it was also no coincidence that many of the people who were there now were very quick to use personalized language, were very quick to attack people for things that I think had nothing to do with their comments. So in one of these one of these panels, one of my colleagues who was a Muslim woman journalist, she happened to disagree on a particular point, and one of these panelists turned around and accused her of wanting the Mughals to invade India, which is kind of kind of fascinating that someone could be accused of that in 2019. So that sort of is the second point, which is that standards have fallen very, very dramatically. I mean, some of you must be following this India-Canada spat. One of the elements of this spat was that a retired Indian ambassador went on television on one of these channels on Z News, and he accused Justin Trudeau of arriving in India in a plane filled with cocaine. Now, it's a completely ridiculous thing, and it tells you more about the mental state of the person making the accusation than about anything close to reality. But the fact is that something has happened in TV news where earlier there would have been some kind of filter at the level of the anchor or the producer or something which would have said that, okay, maybe this guy doesn't belong on national TV. That has ended. Anyone can be on national TV. It's time. The third thing that has happened is that the media has surrendered any sense of independent judgment. And here again, I'll use an example from Ravish's talk. The whole idea that, I'm not a Bollywood expert, but the whole idea that some obscure Bollywood figure named Sushant Singh Rajput, who had died months earlier in somewhat murky circumstances, that what happened in this person's life many, many months ago is the single most compelling thing that a nation of 1.4 billion people should care about during COVID. I mean, at one level, it's almost laughable, right? It's a level of absurdity. But yet, that is what we saw on channel after channel. So what that means is I can't believe, or I refuse to believe, that the people making the decision of this is what we're going to talk about tonight, genuinely believe that Sushant Singh Rajput's fate was the single most important thing happening in India, but they had basically decided to surrender their judgment to the kind of narrative that he's talked about. But if you go beyond these three things, right, the lack of professionalism, the end of standards, and the surrender of independent judgment, I'd say you could pull them all together and say that what's happening more fundamentally is that the role of the media in India is changing. The role of the media is no longer what we try to we imagine the role of the media to be in a liberal democracy, which is to check the excesses of government power. It has become to amplify the message of whoever is in power. Now, I want to have a sort of small piece of to make it interesting, a little bit of a disagreement or a difference in emphasis from Ravish. And here again, coming back to the Goodbye Lenin analogy, I think it's certainly true that if you were to compare India of 2023 to India of 2013, we've seen some very dramatic changes. But what if we were to go back, instead of 10 years, what if we were to go back 50 years? What if we were to compare the India of 2023 with the India of 1973? You had a cult of personality. You had a maximum leader who was on television every night. You had that leader hobnobbing with world leaders and was therefore, kind of like what's happening with G20, projected as the only Indian politician who had global stature. You had editors routinely changed when elections changed. In 1980, when Indira Gandhi came back to power in 1980, one of the first things that happened that they changed the editor of India Today, they changed the editor of the Indian Express. And you had hagiographic books by journalists. So I think in some ways what has happened is that I agree that there was a period, and you mentioned the Nirbhay movement and you mentioned the anti-corruption movement. There was a period where it seemed like the Indian media was becoming more free and independent and able to exercise its own judgment. But that itself was something that I would say really kicks in from the era of coalition governments from 91, deepens with the advent of private news. NDTV obviously was a trailblazer in that. But if you go back and look at Indian political history all the way from 1947, I would say that for a long, certainly the Indira Gandhi period was something very similar with one big difference. And that big difference was that the previous form of illiberalism, previous sort of form where the government commanded the commanding heights of the media, was not directed against one group of Indian citizens. The difference here is not, to my mind, that India has not seen something that is very similar before, but it has seen control before in the service of a powerful prime minister. That is not new. The part that is new is that this media now is directed inward and paints one section of Indian citizens, the Muslims, as a problem. And I think that's the crucial part that has changed between sort of what the advent of the Modi government in 2014 signals. To end, I want to leave with 5 questions that occurred to me as I was reading, and I would love to get Ravish's thoughts on these 5 questions. The first is that, has journalism in India really died? Or has its soul, in the best Hindu fashion, migrated to YouTube? The second question is, if it has migrated to YouTube and to these other alternative places, how secure are these new islands? In the last talk when Shekhar Gupta was here, Ellen Barry was one of the commentators, and she made a very striking parallel with Russia, where she pointed out that even after the advent of Putin, there were many small, gutsy, independent islands of real journalism that remained in Russia, but that when you reduce this to a few islands, then once the waters rise, those islands can very easily get submerged. So how robust are the islands in India would be my second question. My third question is, how different is the picture if you look beyond the world of Hindi news and mainstream English news? So when I read your talk, sort of what I had in my mind was, even though you may not have mentioned it, so I had in my mind Republic, Z News, what NDTV is now, you mentioned Doordarshan and so on. But what if we were to go beyond Hindi India? How different does it look if you were watching in Kolkata or in Chennai or in places where there are long-standing opposition governments and no real BJP presence? I would include Andhra and Telangana in that range. So what do we do when we get out of the Hindi heartland and the India? Does the picture look the same or does it look different? The fourth question is that if you look at the sort of experience of people in other places where there's been some kind of quasi-authoritarianism, human beings are very smart and they quickly figure out what is propaganda. Nobody believed the news in the Soviet Union or in any of the Warsaw Pact countries. Do you think that there is a chance that the Godi media will simply end up not mattering because it'll just become obvious to people that this is not news and this is propaganda? Or do you think that because they're playing on these religious fault lines, they may remain relevant? And my fifth and last question is, going forward, do you think that a different government would result in a very different environment? Or do you think that if there were a different government, all we would see is one set of people who are seen as hostile to a particular ideology replaced with another set of people hostile to a different ideology? So why don't I leave it at that, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Let me now invite my new colleague, Paulimarai Chaudhary. She just arrived at Brown. She's an associate professor of sociology and international public affairs with appointments here at the Watson Institute and in sociology department. In the interest of time, to give them, our commentators, more time, I'll simply say one more line in introduction. Her book, Capable Women, Incapable States, Negotiating Violence and Rights in India, published by Oxford University Press in 2021, won multiple prizes and was a big attraction for us when we were recruiting her here. Welcome. Follow me.
Well, I thought I was going to go third, so I was feeling very relaxed. But at least I haven't run out of all of the things I was going to say. So thank you so much, first of all, Ravish. That was a really troubling talk. So, while I was listening to you and also reading the piece you sent us, I was thinking about this broader question of how this political transformation has happened so rapidly, right? Which Ashu opens the comments with, right? And so one way we could think about it is that, oh, this is a charismatic leader, right? I've been teaching Weber all week. Very bad idea, by the way, right? But thinking about, okay, like Modi as a charismatic leader who is really bringing, as Ashu points out, this new political space into being, and the media being one of the tactics and spaces through which a new hegemony is being created, right? So I'm thinking of that and reading your story, and there's this idea that there's been a dramatic shift since 2014, right? So many of my comments are going to be geared around that proposition. Is it dramatic? Or is there a different way to think about it? So what I found very compelling was the core thing that you give us in your lecture, which is this idea that basically what's happened, or what is still happening, is the emergence of a disempowered but nationalist viewer Hindu, right? It's an interesting contradiction that the viewer is simultaneously disempowered but also quite actively nationalist and Hindu. And critically for you, this emergence has to do with misinformation, right? That media outlets are feeding viewers fake news, making up facts to widen ethnic cleavages and raise caste and class-based anxieties. I find that very compelling. I wanted to know a few things about this. One is just actually a very basic question about what is Gaudiya media? Who is Gaudiya media and who isn't? So we're talking about Z News, NDTV, Times of India, but fundamentally, what makes media outlets more or less susceptible to being co-opted by political power holders? So what has enabled some of these islands that you talked about to still be around, right? And not all of them are YouTube. We do have instances of media that it seems to still be resisting, right? What is enabling them to continue to resist? Is it money? Is it something else, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Exactly, yeah, exactly, right? What has allowed some kind of autonomy in these spaces? Just out of curiosity, but also, can we strengthen those sources of autonomy in order to keep these islands alive, or to expand the islands in the future? Two, I wanted to know a bit more about how this has happened. So, what techniques, concretely, do central governments and state governments have at their disposal to control this chain, right, between whatever they want, what media outlets are reporting, what content editors and journalists are reporting? And so you provide a really interesting answer, I think, in your piece, which is that a lot of it they don't actually have to do. Like, they don't have to do anything because these spaces are manned, and literally manned, right? There's men in them, and they're largely upper caste, they're largely Hindu. And so there's just a lot of people in these spaces already whose political affiliations align with this kind of vision. And so not much has had to be done. These people are sort of primed to take these sorts of actions. But I'm wondering if there's a series of other ways of thinking about this, right? Largely, we have the largest number of journalists right now who have been arrested in India under the anti-terrorist acts, right, in the history of India. So what are the sort of stronger measures, i.e. legal, that are at the disposal of the state, and what are the other softer measures? And which kinds of tactics are targeting which kinds of media? So I'd love a little bit, of clarification on that. Third, I so much of what I've been watching happen, and also looking at my own family, right? Even my father, a self-identified Naxalite, anti-BJP person. This week, he suddenly tells me to follow up on what's happening with Canada, right? Suddenly, he's like, hey, did you know that, I just came from Canada, by the way, from McGill, right? So he's like, oh, did you know that, Indians in Canada are being attacked? And I was like, what are you talking about, right? So this is part of what's been distributed by, and where is he getting this from? From WhatsApp. So another question, he's not getting it from, right? It's all from social media. And by the way, this is a very supposedly critical person who does not like Modi. And he's like, hey, guess what? The Indians are being attacked. And I was like, no, Dad, this is part of the narrative that is now being spun because of the conflict between Trudeau and Modi. And he's like, oh, So my question for you is, where does social media fit into your analysis, right? Is Gaudiya media just as bad as these WhatsApp groups and self-selecting social media groups where people are just distributing fake news? Okay. And finally, to maybe just follow up on what you said, right? And to link it to the first question I had about what makes media more or less susceptible. What do you think we should be doing as viewers? Like, how can we change this situation? Are there any options available to us, either as academics, but also just media consumers? How should we be thinking about the possibilities for change? Are there any? I'm going to stop there and let Prerna take over. Thank you.
Our last commentator is Prerna Singh, my colleague here for quite some time, quite a few years, and was also my steering committee member at the Center for Saxena Center. She's the Mahatma Gandhi Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies with appointments in political science and at Watson Institute. And once again, in the interest of time, let me just mention her multiple prize-winning book, multiple prizes, How Solidarity Works for Welfare, Subnationalism and Social Development in India, published by Cambridge in 2017. And her current work, here's my summary, I'm sure it has changed. Politics and Culture in India and China's Public Health is one way to describe the project, I think.
It's always nice to hear other people describe it because then you know what you're putting out. So I'll make sure that yeah. So, in the corporate world, if a company's product becomes popular enough, it risks something called genericization, which is when the public begins to associate a brand name with the generic class of the product itself. So Xerox for photocopy, Google to describe any kind of digital search, and in the Indian context, Fevicol standing for any kind of adhesive. And so such is the cult status of our guest today that his name itself is synonymous and symbolic of fortitude, of idealism, of standing up for beliefs, for persevering in the face of all odds, and of firmly, steadfastly speaking truth to power each night. Such that I've heard people in India say to me, "Inse miliye ye hamare sansthan ki Ravish Kumar hain. Meet her, this is the Ravish Kumar of our organization. Ya wo chale, hamare mohalle ke Ravish Kumar." There goes the Ravish Kumar of our neighborhood. And for many of us each evening, as television sets around us blare the shrill and by now sadly familiar cacophony of a cocktail of hate and misinformation, 4 simple words, which Ashu also parodied, Namaskar, mein Ravish Kumar, serve as this balm, this bell, the heralding of a calm, thoughtful, and usually sobering reflection on and reckoning with the goings-on in the world around us. So I want to actually just begin by saying thank you. Thank you for all that you've done, for all that you continue to do. And I've heard people ask you, how do you get the courage, the resilience to do what you're doing? And you respond with your trademark understatedness, मैं तो बस अपना काम कर रहा हूँ. I'm just doing my job. लेकिन ये जो आप काम कर रहे हैं, ये बहुत कर्म की बात है. This job, the काम that you're doing is also an act of great karma. So it's a great honor for us to welcome you into our community at Brown, and personally a great privilege for me to be able to engage with you. And responding to this talk has been hard because these are usually meant to be in the vein of a critical dialogue, and we academics, and as Ashu mentioned, I've been at it for a little while, are trained in critique. This is our job, so to say. And for those of you who may know me or have attended such events in the past, it's something that comes pretty easy to me. And yet, as I read Ravish's speech and I heard him deliver it today, I found myself experiencing emotions that are not very familiar to us academics. Agreement, admiration, awe. I agree wholeheartedly with all of Ravish's points. I admire their incisiveness and insightfulness, and I'm in awe of his clarity and brilliance. And so my comments today are less a critical engagement as trying to walk a little with and take forward what you said, focusing in particular on this metaphor of a battle. And the movie which many of us saw last night, powerful, again, as Volumi said, really just troubling, is shot through. The movie is called While We Watched. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's publicly available on PBS and YouTube and really worth your time. And the maker of the movie, Vinay Shukla, has called it a trauma capsule. Reviews here in the US, including the New York Times, have called it a battle cry. And certainly the impression we are left with after watching the movie is this idea of Ravish as a lone warrior fighting this lonely battle. And indeed, it appears that he himself sees it as such, and so I want to ask, what kind of war? Professor Varshni mentioned that among Ravish's many honors is the Magsaysay Award. When he was accepting the award, in his speech, delivered also and translated into English, he says, "Not all battles are fought for victory. Some are fought to tell the world that someone was there on the battlefield." And I think here is where I have a kernel of disquiet. For one, as I hear these words, I ask myself, has Ravish given up? Is he reconciled to losing? But the thing is, you just have to watch Ravish any night of the week to know that that answer is no. He's still fighting with full force, with fortitude, with ferocity, with fortitude. His acknowledgement of the overwhelming power of his opponent, his judgment that they are the more likely winners of this war, has not influenced the intensity with which he's fighting, but I want to suggest today that they have influenced his battle plan. Not how hard, but the way. And I want to suggest here that this trademark modesty that I spoke about at the beginning, his understatedness, might actually be coming in the way of him acknowledging and our realizing that there is a battle plan. So what is this battle plan? I want to break it up into two: the them, our opponents, and the us, the ones who are fighting against them. So first, this question of how best to counter our opponents. And I think here the brilliance of the battle plan begins with Ravish's identification in today's lecture of Hindu insecurity as the reservoir, as this core driving force that is basically at the crux of the support for Hindutva. It is this sense of Hindu inadequacy, of insecurity, that the shrill hysteria of Godi media is constantly trying to stoke, but it's not new. It is the crucible of Hindu nationalism. It's in fact one of the founding tropes. So if you go back to the turn of the 20th century, to how early Hindu nationalists in the early 1900s used the very first colonial census, used demographic data, misused demographic data, to begin to conjure up this fear of a coming demographic apocalypse. This idea that Hindus would be reduced to a minority in their own homeland, this obsession with Muslim fertility rates. And you see it really shoot through all of India's post-colonial history, this idea of Hindu insecurity. It's demographic, it's at the attempts to rewrite history textbooks to eliminate the contributions of the Mughal Empire. It's Hindu insecurity that drives the renaming, which Ravish mentioned, of streets, gardens, cities. It's at the construction of this idea of love jihad, that Muslim men are forcefully converting Hindu women, of corona jihad, that Muslims are infecting Hindus with COVID. It's at the heart of Pulwana, and it's a very successful strategy. And I think what's clear is that it works in a way much more than kind of economic reasons, because the many missteps that the regime has taken, the rising unemployment, the inequality, none of these seem to be sufficient to swing the tide. And so, Ravish continues to draw attention to the many economic and social failures, but I think he himself realizes that it's not going to be sufficient. So he realizes the strategy that is unlikely to work, and he also realizes that the regime, the opponents, the them, control the resources. They're dominant across all forms of communication. Palomi mentioned WhatsApp, Godi media. He knows that he can't shout louder. So the battle plan, the way that I see it, is that it's almost a kind of guerrilla warfare, which is not to counter the enemy directly, but to actually feed and change that upon which Hindu insecurity preys. And so if Godi media is fanning Hindu insecurity, which in turn drives up their TRP ratings and voting for the BJP, and indeed recruitment to the mother organization of the RSS, then Ravish's strategy almost seems to be to create this alternative sense of Hindu security that will dredge this reservoir of support, create an emotional settledness such that the recruiting strategy for Hindutva media and organizations begins to sound a little hollow, that it does not have the same affective appeal. And how does he do this? I suggest two ways: the medium and the message. So the first is the use of Hindi, which interestingly, Ravish told me, is actually not his mother tongue. It's Bhojpuri. But Hindi is interesting because it is the language in which we hear some of the most vitriolic Islamophobia and hate speech, including just recently in Parliament. I mean, Hindi slurs, Hindi hate speech just jars, it cuts differently than in English. It's also the language in which dissent is much more dangerous. And I think, again, this was mentioned by my fellow commentators, vernacular voices are much more threatening to the present regime than those of the anglicized elite. But, and Sadanand again mentioned some of these subnational differences, in as much as Ravish is appealing to this Hindu Hindi heartland, which is a key constituency of Hindutva, his use of Hindi, I argue, instills some sense of a calm, a recognition, and a potential assertion. And social psychologists, linguists, neuroscientists have all written, researched about how about how the use of the mother tongue, about hearing the mother tongue, speaking in the mother tongue, creates something measurable, tangible, a sense of belonging, a certain sense of being seen, of seeing yourself in the world. And so, again, this was from like an annual reviews article in psychology, which said that, the bottom line said, using one's native language, hearing it, creates a sense of warmth, trust, and familiarity in personal interaction. And I argue that there's something happening here, especially as the medium has moved to YouTube. And YouTube, what has YouTube done? It's allowed Ravish to reach out in a way much more direct, freed from the format of these, hugely popular and iconic flagship television shows that Professor Varshni mentioned. Now he has this kind of direct connection with the viewer. And I argue that if you look at what Ravish is putting out, and you look at the way that he's doing it, you see this shoring up of the idea of a Hindu security. Ravish refers to Hindu Sukh. I want to even suggest this is possibly a Hindu Suraksha. And it's a Hindu Suraksha that I think is devoid to a large extent of a kind of otherization on the one hand, and also of a kind of pandering to Hinduism in the way that it's Kejriwal reciting the Hanuman Chalisa, or potentially Rahul Gandhi visiting temples. So why is Ravish, in his visit to Thailand, also visiting and giving a pretty extended broadcast on a Brahma temple in Thailand? Why is he also... Sorry? No, this is a Socratic method if you want to join in. To me, this idea that there is this extended segment, the fact that just yesterday he broadcast a long segment with the MIT Brain Sciences Lab, what is happening with these broadcasts? On the one hand, it's an act of intimacy because social media allows and necessitates your bringing your millions of followers into your world as you travel, but I suggest that you're trying to do something more. Perhaps give them something positive, something powerful, that again, I think is not a demonization of minorities, and neither is it a resorting to Hinduism. And at its best, I wonder if this kind of incipient battle plan has, if you have it, can potentially heal that emotional insecurity which Hindutva is founded and has remained fixated on by making your opponent's recruiting strategy sound hollow. And quickly in conclusion, so if we've spoken so far about that part of the battle plan, which is about how to counter your opponents, I want to end by asking, how then do we consolidate the us? Who is the us? Which again builds on some of the comments you've received. You have millions of followers on YouTube and various social media platforms, but still in the movie, and some of this is a consequence of the way in which the movie is made, the haunting, lasting sense we get is of solitariness, of your pursuit, the singularity of your endeavor, of you as this lone, lonely warrior. You speak about vidroh ki mayusi, the loneliness of protest. And so I was wondering if you might speak a little about that, but also about networks, partnerships, friendships, communities, potential and real, on YouTube, beyond YouTube, with newspapers like The Hindu and the Deccan Herald, the quieter but very important work of the women, of Khabar Lahariya, of Lalan Top. Barkha Dutt drew this distinction between chamcha and morcha, sycophants and agitationists. What is the relationships within the morcha? Is there a possibility of alliances, of a fraternity, of a non-chamcha solidarity? How might that too be a powerful, slightly under-examined strategy in your battle plan? But thank you for your words today, for your work, for your example, and for your inspiration. It's been wonderful having you amidst us these past few days. We are humbled, grateful for, and much richer for your presence.
20 मिनट हैं
अच्छा
तो यहीं पे बैठ लें क्या
यहीं पे बैठ लें और ये वाला मैं हिंदी में बोल दूँ
हाँ मैं कर
वो लग रहा था कोई और बोला है मैं आया हूँ तो मैं भी जरा बोल लूँ
तो 3:39 we have 21 minutes so first thing is that he would like to yes we'll come he would you like to answer some of the questions first or take some more questions
नहीं यही काफी हो गया है
this is quite a lot he says okay so go ahead so how about let's say 10 minutes huh चलिए
सदानंद थैंक यू पॉलोमी आपका भी बहुत शुक्रिया और प्रेरणा जी आपका भी एक सवाल का जवाब पूरा नहीं है मेरे पास लेकिन उसको मैं अभी एक्सप्लोर करना चाहता हूँ जब आप इमरजेंसी के पीरियड से तुलना करते हैं इस वक्त की
I don't have a full explanation of a particular point that has been raised, and that's been raised elsewhere also, and Sadanand raised it centrally. What is the relationship between, how will you compare how the Mrs. Gandhi's exercise of power during her period of unchallenged politics and the current exercise of power? So he says he doesn't have a full answer, but I suppose he has a half answer. Yeah.
इसलिए कि देखना चाहिए कि उस वक्त कितने न्यूज़पेपर्स थे कितना न्यूज़ चैनल था इस वक्त 400-500 न्यूज़ चैनल्स की बात कर रहा हूँ और कई सौ न्यूज़पेपर्स की बात कर रहा हूँ सिर्फ अपने 4 का नाम लिया है तो स्केल और फिर उसके साथ सोशल मीडिया का कॉम्प्लेक्स में एक मीडिया कॉम्प्लेक्स भी बात कर रहा हूँ फिर आरएसएस फिर खुद अपने आप में मीडिया फिर पॉलिटिकल पार्टी वर्कर ये सब मिलके जो स्केल है उससे कहीं ज़्यादा है वो पीरियड छोटा था ये पीरियड 10 साल का हो चुका है और जिस तरह का वो ठीक कहा उन्होंने सदानंद ने कि ये एक बड़ा डिफरेंस कम्युनलिज्म का दिखता है कि ये पूरी तरह से ऑफिशियल हो गया है लेकिन अगर आप स्केल सोशल सपोर्ट फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट रीच उस वक्त मीडिया का रीच उतना नहीं था और ऑपोजिशन का स्पेस कम होगा मैं नहीं जानता हूँ मैंने उसका उस समय के अखबारों को नहीं देखा है उस 2 साल के बाद ऑपोजिशन का स्पेस कैसा था और अब कैसा है एक उदाहरण देना चाहता हूँ जब 2019 का इलेक्शन चल रहा था तो हिंदी के 2 बड़े अखबारों के इलेक्शन पेज का मैं रोज़ काउंट करता था कि 20 न्यूज़ आइटम्स इलेक्शंस रिलेटेड हैं स्पेशल इलेक्शंस रिलेटेड उसमें से बेयरली एक न्यूज़ आइटम ऑपोजिशन का होता था 19 न्यूज़ आइटम बीजेपी रिलेटेड होता था ये तो नंबर की बात हुई जब क्वालिटेटिव एनालिसिस करेंगे तो जो ऑपोजिशन की जो स्टोरी लिखी गई है रिपोर्ट लिखी गई है वो बहुत जिब्रिश तरीके से लिखी गई है तो वो है टू शो द नंबर दैट ऑपोजिशन हैज़ बीन गिवन अ प्लेस बट यू कुड नॉट मेक एनी सेंस आउट ऑफ दैट
So he says there is no doubt that Sadanand is right about Indira Gandhi not targeting a particular community in her authoritarian style. As Mr. Modi has done vis-a-vis the Muslims of India. So that's correct. However, there appears to be, on the basis of what he knows, and this is being presented as a half answer at this point, and probably will be developed more fully later, the scale today is very different. There weren't 400 channels or 1,000 channels. There wasn't social media at that time. And so the scale is very different. Therefore, the way this authoritarianism operates is very different. And secondly, it has lasted much longer. It's completing 10 years. If you want to think of Mrs. Gandhi's years of authoritarianism, maybe you can start in 1973. Some would say only 75, but let's say he started in 1973. 77, it's over. Then she returns in 80 and is killed in 84. So whether that period is also will be called very authoritarian, I don't know what Sadanand would say.
I mean, I would say that she was the media freedom throughout her period from 1966 to 1984, with apart from that interregnum, all of it was emergency was the worst point. I don't think you had very free media even when she came back in 1980.
Okay, so but anyway, this is, in other words, there is a disagreement here, and the answer would be developed more fully. But you don't disagree with the fact that the scale is very different today. The sheer number of people who are in the media, either through social media or traditional media, the scale is very different.
Yeah, there are many more voices, but I would say that if you're looking at it in terms of pro-government voices, there are many more voices here. So there's more amplification, I agree with that. But if you look at it from the other side of the equation, which is how many anti-government voices are there? There weren't that many allowed even then.
Okay.
एक चीज़ और ऐड करना चाहता हूँ। उस समय और इस समय जो एक फ़र्क आया है, वो एक चेंज ये भी है कि जो हिंदू दर्शक है, वो जिस तरह से एक्टिवेट वेपनाइज्ड किया गया है एंटी अपोजिशन, इंदिरा गांधी के समय इतना संभव रहा होगा कि आप किसी रैली में जाकर भाषण दे सकते हैं, भले आप कवर कर रहे हैं, अपनी सोसाइटी में बोल सकते हैं या छोटे पब्लिक मीटिंग में कर सकते हैं। इस समय जिस तरह से पब्लिक को एक्टिवेट किया गया है आईटी सेल के ज़रिए कि हम जैसे लोग अगर बाहर जा रहे हैं तो इस तरह से गालियां लिखी जा रही हैं, थ्रेट क्रिएट किए जा रहे हैं, तो ये जो जनता है वो भी स्टेट के रूप में बना दी गई है। तो वो कांस्टेंट सेंसरशिप पब्लिक भी कर रही है, पब्लिक का अपने भीतर के छोटे छोटे सेगमेंट्स का और डिसेंटिंग वॉइस।
So, and the best way to illustrate this point, yesterday he said that this is perhaps the first time in Indian history where what happens in housing societies and the discussions that take place there show how much the narrative, even at the micro level, has been controlled. So Ravish is saying one more difference to be noted is that the narrative at the micro level, at the street level, at the housing society level was never so controlled by Mrs. Gandhi. And it seems Sadanand is agreeing about that.
There was no online lynch mob then.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And if you share my link in that housing societies group, chances are that you being thrown out of that group. So it's not easy job for a citizen to share a link of journalist with their fellow citizens. So this demarcation is very strong and lethal. The second question is YouTube. Yes, YouTube is giving us a chance, but to produce a kind of journalism through YouTube has become very difficult. Resources is a continuous problem of any kind of professional journalism, but you have a copyright strike, fear of copyright strike. You do not have a very clear-cut copyrights for public images. Like when Prime Minister is speaking, it should be considered that this is a public property. But if you use his video, which is shot by or recorded by Prasara Bharati and Doordarshan, and chances are likely that you will get a notice to remove this and demonetize your video. Second, if you use Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha proceedings, the copyright statements are very unclear. So you never know that if you use that proceedings for your video, you will get a notice or not. They will choose the right time to send you a notice. They can even send a notice a year after. So it's very difficult. So your resources are very limited. You cannot show Prime Minister speaking in Parliament at length in YouTube. There are many YouTubers who are showing, but if I show, there is a risk involved in it. So what do? I write his scripts and give my voice, which is very painful, and in both ways. So the viewer gets confused, and I have to put out a statement that since I'm not allowed, it's not clear that YouTubers can use Lok Sabha, Sansad TV's visuals as freely as news channels are using. So that's why I am reading. So I need to, it's injustice for him also, because I cannot take his long speech. So I choose 1 or 2, 3 lines. So that's not proper for him also. So these kind of, I cannot have employ a reporter, and that reporter existence is threatened all the time. Uttar Pradesh, a big state of India, has a rule that officers are authorized to assess that any news item which has been published in newspapers or broadcasted has damaged a reputation of the district or the state or not. So now there is a many instance that if there was a reporter who sent a video to check with the officer that is it right that the government textbooks are being sold in the public, which should not be, and he got an FIR. So these kind of rules are being placed, and yet to be seen that who is getting first in that trap. So these are the problem. The reporting side is very less. It has to be less because I'm not protected as institutions would have protected me. If I go in the public, many people would surround me. I do not know which way this crowd will go in my favor or against me. If they turn against me, I do not have entitled. If I start calling police also knows that this is not the person to rush in time. We can go after 5 times, and then things will happen. So these are the challenges, and we are mainly doing commentary. So the first-hand reporting is not there.
Grace, can we extend this session by 10 minutes or so? I hope we can. I hope this room is not reserved after this. So let's see. Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. You will also continue recording and live streaming for 10 minutes. Okay.
Extended to 4:30.
Can we go on till about 4:15, 20 or so?
Ravish, I will have to go to pick up my kid. I'm just letting you know, but I'll see what.
Okay, I see a lot of hands. Let me go to you. Yes, first. At the back. Miss, would you introduce yourself and then, Oh, no. The world has changed. We start with a very different gender, sir. Okay. Yes.
थोड़ा सा नजदीक आ जाइए ताकि
You have to come down, Aditi.
आप हिंदी में पूछ के अंग्रेजी में आप तो ट्रांसलेट कर ही सकते हैं. हाँ.
मेरा ये सवाल था कि अभी जो हो रहा है, हम लोग का पहले भी बात की, हाँ, कि मीडिया कैसे चेंज हुआ है 14 के बाद, लेकिन हम आपसे ये जानना चाह रहे थे कि मीडिया जो न्यूज़ दिखा रहा है वो चेंज हुआ है, उनका जो प्रोपेगेंडा है वो चेंज हुआ है. मीडिया जो था, पीपल हु मेड मीडिया, वो तो सालों से, दशकों से सेम ही लोग चले आ रहे हैं. तो क्या इस बारे में कभी हमने सोचा है या फिर इसके ऊपर बात किया है कि अगर मीडिया का जो कॉम्पोजिशन है वो अगर पहले से थोड़ा अलग होता, अगर हमारे मीडिया में ज़्यादा मुस्लिम्स होते, ज़्यादा नॉन सवर्णा होते, तो क्या वो मीडिया थोड़ा कम
बहुत सारे ऐसे मुस्लिम्स.
So basically the question is on many people's minds, and Aditi is asking that question. You say yourself, Ravish, that that the newsroom is dominated by upper caste men generally, there are women also, but upper caste, let's say. Had the newsroom had a sufficient, whatever that sufficient is, sufficient representation of Muslims and non-upper castes, would the media realities today have been different?
Sorry, just wanted to add to that that it's not only about the number of people, number of person, like you can come and tell me that you have this XYZ person from different backgrounds, but I'm also asking about with representation comes political awareness, something that we are learning in sociology, and I'm thankful for that. But now that these media channels that are dominated by upper caste men, they also feel vulnerable because they see their resources are being taken away by peoples from Muslim communities, non-Savarna communities. So it's not only about numbers, but also about ideologies.
Okay.
ये जो दूसरा हिस्सा आपने कहा है वो थोड़ा प्रॉब्लमेटिक है कि उनके रिसोर्सेज लिए जा रहे हैं तो इसलिए वो न्यूज़ चैनल में ऐसे बिहेव कर रहे हैं कि मुस्लिम ले रहे हैं.
The second part he doesn't agree with. Second part that the resources of the upper caste journalists are being taken away. They feel might be taken away by Muslims and lower caste. He says no, that's not the issue. Okay.
तो वो इशू नहीं है. रिप्रेजेंटेशन को मेंशन करना चाहिए क्योंकि वो नहीं है. वो अगर होता तो क्या ये नहीं होता? मुझे लगता है तब भी होता, क्योंकि सवाल ओनरशिप का है और सवाल करेज का है कि आप उससे रिवोल्ट करते हैं कि नहीं करते हैं, आप उसको नो बोलने की हिम्मत है कि नहीं है. इस वक्त बहुत से मुस्लिम्स एंकर हैं, वो सेम प्रोपेगेंडा करते हैं, वो कर रहे हैं, तो वो होते तो भी फर्क नहीं पड़ता. हाँ, उनको बाहर जाके करना पड़ता, जिस तरह से अभी पहले से ही बाहर हैं तो उनको भी बाहर जाना पड़ता, किसी को भी. इस प्रोपोजिशन से जो भी डिसेंट करेगा उसको बाहर जाना पड़ेगा. वो किसी कास्ट बैकग्राउंड से वो खुद को नहीं रोक सकता था कि हम अगर नॉन सवर्ना हैं और न्यूज़ रूम में हैं तो हम इसको चेंज कर देते, इसको ये जो ऑन स्लॉट है इसको हम रोक देते.
So the question of lower castes, more non-upper castes, more Muslims as in charge of newsrooms and more anchors from those communities would not have changed the realities, because the issue is the ownership structure, according to Ravish. Who owns the media, and regardless of what your background is, do you have the courage to say no to what they want?
और अंबानी और अदानी को क्या ज़रूरत पड़ी है? आपको लगता है कि उनका यकीन सोशल जस्टिस में है? नहीं है. अगर वो उनका यकीन ये है तो सोशल जस्टिस के तहत नॉन सवर्णा एंकर को ले तो आएंगे, लेकिन तब उन्हें जर्नलिज्म करना पड़ेगा.
सॉरी, लास्ट बस ये बोलना चाह रहे थे कि हम इसलिए बोले कि सिर्फ रिप्रेजेंटेशन का बात नहीं है, हम लोग उस आइडियोलॉजी का भी बात कर रहे थे जो रिप्रेजेंटेशन के साथ आता है. जब आपके
नहीं वो बात नहीं.
So this is the idea that if you recruited, let's put it very bluntly here, recruited Ambedkarites, would that make a difference?
ये हम मान के चल रहे हैं कि बीजेपी की साइड में अम्बेडकराइट्स नहीं है. क्या हम अम्बेडकराइट्स को एक होमोजेनस पॉलिटिकल कैटेगरी मानते हैं जो सिर्फ हिंदुत्व के अपोजिशन में है? तो फिर वो सारे जो अम्बेडकराइट्स बिलीव करते हैं, इवन प्राइम मिनिस्टर हिमसेल्फ, वो भी अपने आप को अम्बेडकराइट कहते हैं. वो तो सबसे ज़्यादा पूजा करते हैं. उन्होंने बिल्डिंग बनाई है अम्बेडकर के नाम पे, सब चीज़ की है उन्होंने. तो बहुत सारे उदित राज उसमें चले गए, अभी कांग्रेस में आ गए हैं. तो बहुत सारे लोग, वो बात ये है कि किसका सोशल कमिटमेंट, कौन अम्बेडकराइट, सारे अम्बेडकराइट्स एक जैसे नहीं हो सकते हैं. किसका शार्प है वो अपना कमिटमेंट अपने इशू के प्रति, और वो किस तरह से रिवोल्ट करता है, क्या करता है. अंबानी और अडानी किसी अम्बेडकराइट्स को रख के जर्नलिज्म अगर कराना चाहते तो रविश कुमार से ही करा लेते. फिर ये जो हेट्रेड इतना फैल रहा है उनके चैनल से, उस एक एंकर को हटा देते. मैं कह रहा हूँ कि आप अगर नॉन सवर्ना एंकर्स को नहीं रखना चाहते हैं, मैं अंबानी जी से पूछता हूँ, आपका कास्ट बायस हो सकता है या कोई बायस नहीं है, चलिए आप उसको हटा के देखिए. कैन ही रिप्लेस? नो. ही ओन्स द चैनल, बट the real owners is someone else.
Yeah, okay, so
he
that's the
cannot
answer.
replace his own anchor. अंबानी भी उस एंकर को अपने ड्राइंग रूम में ऑन करके नहीं देख सकते हैं अपने गेस्ट के साथ, आओ मेरे न्यूज़ चैनल का इतना फर्स्ट क्लास प्रोग्राम आ रहा है, वो नहीं देख सकते हैं उसको, लेकिन वो उसको हटा नहीं सकते हैं। ये अंबानी की आई वॉन्ट टू यूज हैसियत में नहीं है।
Ambani doesn't have, despite his money, does not have the power to challenge the establishment, is the argument here, right? And Ambedkarites, some are going to fight, but many are not going to fight, and would look after their jobs or would redefine their Ambedkarism to suit the power realities. Okay. Now, the gentleman who did I upset him?
लेकिन रिप्रेजेंटेशन का सवाल इंपॉर्टेंट है, कंटेंट कितना चेंज करता है वो दूसरा सवाल है, रिप्रेजेंटेशन नहीं है, ये बहुत क्रिमिनल चीज है। वो जो एक एक्सक्लूजनरी चीज है वो आप इस सवाल से उसको नहीं,
अच्छा, regardless of what consequence lower caste and Muslim anchors would have had, regardless, they had to be and they should be recruited. That's the point here. Yes, can you please come to the microphone?
Ashu, can I make a suggestion? Should we collect a few questions?
हाँ, ठीक है. I will collect. Thank you. Yes, I'll collect 3 questions now,
And Ravish,
in the interest of
I
time.
request you to do Hindi-English mix so that you
Okay.
don't also have to do it.
No, then I don't have to translate because you can speak whenever you want. Make sure.
if you allow wrong English, I am fine.
नहीं, आप क्या?
इसका फॉलोअप मतलब ओनरशिप स्ट्रक्चर के सवाल से हम सहमत हैं, बट ओनरशिप स्ट्रक्चर और कास्ट का क्या कोरिलेशन है? अब ले दे के अंबानी भी तो बनिया ही है ना, तो उसका क्या इफेक्ट पड़ता है? और जो सोशल कमिटमेंट की बात भी कर रहे हैं या करेज की भी बात कर रहे हैं, उसका भी तो कोरिलेशन कहाँ से आप आ रहे हैं उससे है ना। अगर आप साउथ दिल्ली में पैदा हुए हैं और वहीं बड़े हुए हैं तो आपको क्या इंसेंटिव है?
Every journalist who are working in Godi media, not necessarily coming from South Delhi.
Sure, but also,
They are not. The
but that is
ownership
also
and
a
the political
reason.
ownership of this media is very different. Yes, there were, now this kind of stories being covered has also stopped. Earlier when when BSP was on the rise, if you can look at the analysis of Mayawati, about Mayawati, prospects of Mayawati, is very different from now. Now, she never sends a press spokesperson to any political debate, but still BSP was covered with lot of sympathies. I'm not talking about earlier period when Kanshi Ramji was struggling and BSP was on the rise. When she established as a powerful chief minister, she got a very, and the Dalit issues were covered. Okay. Now atrocities are not being covered because these kind of stories are harming the political master. This can be called, if you want to use political sociology here, he's arguing against sociological determinism. That where you've come from does not determine exactly what you do. Okay, and that's one. And secondly, ownership structure is a very different kind of issue because one is who owns and who does he or she answer to. Right? Okay, now let's take two questions now. So, will you introduce yourself and then Bina Server after that? Two questions, yeah.
You should use the mic because it's being recorded.
Huh?
You should use the mic so that
Yeah,
people hear
we
you
are.
on the recording.
This is being
on the
recorded,
live
so
stream.
yes,
Use the
your
mic.
microphone has gone somewhere.
No, it's here.
Yeah,
They're both there.
okay, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Ravish ji. My name is Ramakrishnan. And,
It's not on.
But I think it'll record. That's the most
you
important.
presented a very North Indian centric view, and I'm from Chennai, Madras, and whenever, like, I go to Chennai, I watch Sun TV usually, and some of the other local channels, and your view of viewer Hindu citizen. So, what are the reasons why it's not catching on in South India? I mean, BJP has tried multiple times. They've just been kicked out of Karnataka. And I don't think they have a prayer in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So are these people not Hindus or are they smarter? Which probably they are. But So the question is, because these people are very religious people, right? Because, I'm from Madras. South Indians are extremely religious people, and they're extremely religious Hindus. But why aren't they catching on to the Hindu lack of security, insecurities, right? I really want you to.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and so we hold it here for the. Sorry, no, yeah, Bina, your second question. Yeah, two questions we're taking together.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Bina Sarwar, and I'm a journalist from Pakistan. I think there's only a few of us from Pakistan here, but we solidarity with you. And I want to just say that the documentary that was shown yesterday, which I teach journalism at Emerson College, and I showed it to my students when they come up there. And my students, by the way, they said to tell you that they send you their best wishes, and they said to ask you, is he okay?
I'm okay.
So in the...
I just had an Italian lunch. Excellent, yeah.
So in your interview with Amy Goodman,
Yes.
in July आपने interview किया था Amy Goodman के साथ, तो उसमें विनय शुक्ला ने एक बहुत खूबसूरत बात कही थी. He said that documentary was his love letter to journalism. And what I want to suggest is that जो आप बात कर रहे हैं media की, you're talking exclusively, like you said, of a certain kind of media, of television broadcast media की आप बात ज़्यादा कर रहे हैं. But that is not journalism. The kind of जो हम देख रहे हैं talk shows में, that is not journalism. तो आपने एक बहुत important बात कही थी in your talk. You talked about the ethics and responsibility of journalism. So I think just to talk about a little bit about how to spread those ideas further, so that people, and I think people recognize that this is propaganda and not journalism.
Okay, so Bina, you're saying when can we create many more Ravish Kumars? Okay,
They already are, like people are saying.
Okay.
Ravish Kumar
So there are two questions here. One is the great question about South India. The South Indian Hindu is very religious, and South Indian Hindu, generally speaking, is not becoming part of what you very inventively call Hindu public sphere, which survives on Hindu insecurity. So how do you, and the media, the so-called quote-unquote vernacular media, is there in Chennai or in Kolkata or increasingly perhaps Bangalore, I think is slightly different, but let's say Hyderabad. These are not the same as Delhi.
But Ashu, I have a follow-up.
But you did ask that question.
So, but my question is beyond that, which is not only are they different, but it seems like you have a kind of repression and authoritarianism or one-party ideology in states also. It's not Hindutva.
It's something
But let
else.
me put it this way, that if I was sitting in Kolkata, I would be more comfortable criticizing Mr. Modi in the pages of the Telegraph than I would be criticizing Mamata Banerjee.
Okay.
That's why I said South India.
To Ravish, boliye.
Yes, I did analyze mainly Hindi news sphere. And this is not a small news sphere. This is the biggest and single language biggest news sphere, which is Hindi one. To say that there is no Godi media in South would be very simplification of this reality and very wrong, I think so. Karnataka BJP is very strong still. RSS is very strong. Don't forget how Gauri Lankesh was silenced. So, but what Sadanand asked a question that I did not speak about English media. I am not well versed in many languages. So yes, this gap has to be there in my speech. But I could have deliberate upon English media a little bit, which I left, but I would like to say here. The Hindiization of English media and the Godi media, I consider English media also a part of Godi media. And very late, I started using semi-Godi media. I would not name the channel and newspapers. Yes, you want to have a respect for those newspapers. You are entitled to respect those newspapers which you named. Let me give an answer about Hindu. Do you still think Hindu is a newspaper? It has become a coaching book of UPSC. Half of the newspapers is filled with explanatory things. And why there are so much explanatory things, know your English kind of things? Because investigating reporting has been replaced. So this is the smartest way to replace journalism with other kind of journalism. So you do not notice that where has investigation gone. So pages after pages have been filled with the kind of, this newspaper has taken a role to prepare for UPSC candidate. So I have a great respect. Most of the time I do quote Hindu newspapers report, but there is a Godi media and semi-Godi media. So there is a kind of trade-off that once in a while you can have a good stories. But if you analyze the tone of headlines of Indian Express before 2014 or till 2018, when Raj Kamal Jha went to a Ramnath Goenka program and Mr. Prime Minister was invited, and he said that he gave an example of Ramnath Goenka and the reporter's affinity with the businessman and how Ramnath Goenka replaced that reporter. And after that, you see the changes in the tone of headline and where the story is placed. You will realize that what is happening with the great newspaper. I still quote with respect many stories in my videos. I'll keep quoting, but this is not the true picture. But one thing I would like to say that, yes, before 2014, it's very interesting. There was a there was a culture, very different culture of speaking in English. Knowing English is different. When English newspaper news anchor speaks, he speaks in a very different way, as if that he is very anglicized. After 2014 or prior to 2014, since Arnab Goswami started speaking in a ruffian way, before that, I never heard any person who is very well versed in English speaking like that. Especially when they speak English, they take very care to speak in English. They like to present themselves very suave, very smart, and very concerned kind of thing. The mannerism of English has changed, which is Hindiization, communalization of English. The first time this television has demonstrated that how English can be used as other languages are used as a street language. When you fight on the street and you use, so the convent code of English was destroyed to give a birth of new kind of English.
Now, let's see. There are some contractual issues here.
Oh,
we need to maybe last two questions when they need to get out. Actually, that's very important. Oh. So let me take three. Okay, let's hear people's voices and you don't have to answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's start here this time. We were here. Let's start here. Yeah, and we'll please go and we'll note your voice here.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I had the honor of seeing your film in New York at the IFC with Amy Goodman and think about it frequently. I'm Ria, I'm a musician and historian, and you spoke very compellingly about the Hindu visual space and the cultivation of that space. I wonder if you could speak about the transformations in the sonic space of the news. So, for example, you mentioned previously before 2014, after communal violence or terrorism events, there would be classical and folk music on the news and things like that. I wonder if you could remark on how that has changed and how the oral culture of the news may have become increasingly communal as well.
Has the oral culture also become communal? If you can comment on whether...
You're just rounding up questions right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today. Both me and my parents have been admirers of your work for a long time, and they're really happy.
The mic. Switch it on.
So thank you for speaking to us today. Me and my parents have both been admirers of your work for a really long time, and they would be really happy to hear that I got to interact with you today. So in my house, sometime after 2014, when the TV media landscape started changing, I started noticing that we stopped watching, or that my family would just stop watching broadcast media, and we switched to like other forms of media consumption and journalism. And so my question has to do with the Hindu viewer that you were talking about. So is the audience for broadcast TV, has that changed and has that been replaced by other viewers? Or is the Hindu viewer that you were talking about just the same viewer that would consume this television before 2014 and now is sort of conditioned to believe in Hindu insecurities and this different kind of ideology?
Okay. Yes, please. We are just collecting questions now.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was incredibly eye-opening. Just as a concerned member of India's new youth, do you see a reality where that insecure Hindu viewer is made secure in his ability to have power over the Indian government and hold them accountable, given that we are technically on paper a democratic country? Do you see a future or reality where that's possible?
Yes, please. After that.
Thank you very much for all that you do. I just wanted to say we've been talking about, Hindu as a monolithic, and I want to say that the BJP has also sort of narrowed the scope of what they define as Hindu. And we also saw that in Mahuma Maitra's, saying, I have my Kali, as opposed to, other versions of Kali. So can we draw upon, can we draw upon solidarity from even from other Hindus to oppose this kind of unidimensional, fundamentalist Hindu narrative? I wanted to say one. And then two is that they've, of course, been predominantly anti-Muslim, but they've also been anti-Christian. And, with the burning of the churches in Karnataka and also all sorts of rules not allowing Christian organizations to come into India. So I was just wondering if there's a way to get more solidarity to build this movement from other
Can we have
sections.
a different RAM, in other words, right? Different from this RAM. Yes, please.
So I'm Hamida, and I'm an Indian Muslim, so thank you on behalf of Indian Muslims, and I'm glad your name is not Rehan Khan, it's Ravish Kumar, so you're alive and healthy. But I have a personal question. You said कि अंबानी की हैसियत नहीं है कि वो किसी को निकाल बाहर करे, तो फिर अडानी की हैसियत कैसे हो गई कि उसने रवीश कुमार को NDTV
मैंने रिजाइन कर दिया था।
I know, तो वही आपने, तो मेरा सवाल
इसलिए कि उनकी हैसियत नहीं थी कि मुझे निकालते।
Exactly. तो ये सवाल ये है कि if voices like you, जो इतने important हैं, they're such important voices, if you will vacate a space that gives you so much visibility, जो NDTV के through आपको थी, तो थोड़ा सा अजीब सा लगता है कि अभी मैंने YouTube channel आपका, I subscribe to it, and 7.2 million people, which is very
Join
heartening.
भी कीजिएगा, thank you.
Which is very heartening. So yeah, it's nice when I saw 7.2 million, but NDTV obviously gave you a much bigger platform, right, as Ravish Kumar. And a part of me wants to question that decision, which is a very personal decision that you made. But if...
No, it wasn't a personal decision.
If you, I would love to listen to that answer.
Yeah.
But why would you vacate a space, independent voices like yours, when you have a platform where you can reach more? Why would you leave that space and
Thanks for
leave
having
us?
trust in Mr. Adani.
I do.
Thanks. I
No,
would
I have
like.
trust in Ravish
That's very
Kumar.
good that we still trust Mr. Adani.
One last question now. We really have to, we have contractual issues here. That's why it's very important.
This is not a question.
Yeah.
This is just a request.
Yeah.
Sir, बिहान के सब्सक्राइबर हैं. थोड़ा
ओह,
प्लीज
भूल गया मैं.
रीजनल थोड़ा
Thank you.
प्लीज रीजनल न्यूज़ और रीजनल हालातों पे भी नजर डालिए. हम लोग एक पेंडुलम में फंस गए हैं.
Say it again,
और
please. What?
I have a Bhojpuri YouTube
Channel.
channel that.
The second thing I wanted to request was स्कूल सीरीज आपका बहुत अच्छा था सर. वो हम लोग के तरफ के बच्चों के लिए बहुत काम करता है. थोड़ा उस पर भी ध्यान दीजिए.
Couldn't follow it.
He's saying that why I have stopped doing university series and school series, just because I do not have much resources.
I see.
It creates a imbalance kind of thing that you are discussing only Bihar, you are not discussing Rajasthan, and you are not discussing Himachal Pradesh. And to cover any state, I do not have now reporters, and to give a correct information that this college has 10,000 students and 6 professors.
अब आपके पास 1 मिनट है. हमें यहाँ से निकलना पड़ेगा.
चलिए, मैं बाहर ही बोल दूंगा.
नहीं, 1 मिनट बोल दीजिए, उसके बाद हमने.
Thank you for listening me, giving me an opportunity to speak here, Mr. Ashutosh Varshney, and for your love and making me comfortable here, a very elitist space, but it's great that your team and your colleague they tried to make me comfortable, and with full respect, love, I get here. I'm very honored and very grateful to you and your institutions. So keep inviting me. I hope that I will learn to speak in a good English, a convent kind of English, which has lost in Indian public space.
We are. And thank you very much on behalf of Brown University and Saxena Center for visiting us, giving us your time.